So this actually provides us with some research opportunities. So let me go to straight to the possible research directions. Actually, I'm looking at what are the possible research as a result of this pandemic. We will need to ask ourselves, will this pandemic have a one-off effect or long-term effect on tourism, on tourists and also firm behavior? I think this is something we have to ask ourselves before we can venture to different research directions and topics. The first, if the pandemic, the impact is temporary or transitory, then the existing theoretical framework will still be very useful and sufficient. So what we need to do, if this is the case, is still using the existing theoretical foundations, but adding the impact. Maybe in econometric type study, we can easily tackle those impact by adding some, dummy variables or using certain intervention responses functions to look at the influence of the pandemic. But after the pandemic is gone, then everything will become normal. So the traditional factors that influence our behavior will still exist, will still not be changed. So this is one type of influence. But on the other hand, if the impact is long-term and permanent, the new theoretical framework may need to be extended or even rewrite some of the new theories. And therefore, this type of research will be groundbreaking and innovative. But I guess this is not true either. I think it is in the future, what will actually happen is something in between, right? I think that's just I think in the future, the existing economic theories will still be useful, but because of this pandemic, and we need to consider a little bit more in terms of our existing framework and what additional factors that we need to consider, right? And how these factors will influence consumers' behavior or tourist behavior. I think that's just, perhaps is a reality in the future. So I'm looking at the possible research from economics perspective, but especially from behavioral economics perspective. Most of our existing economic theory or economic studies related to tourism actually using neoclassical economic theory or classical economic theory in which the consumers or firms are assumed to be rational, which means they make decisions in a rational way, right? So everyone actually, if not everyone, most of the consumers or tourists will react to the changes of the influencing factors in the same manner, right? But we know this is not entirely true. And sometimes we are, as consumers, we are emotional, right? We are emotional instead of rational, especially given what has happened recently with the COVID-19 pandemic. Actually, many of us react the tourist behavior, tourist activity in a different way than what we have reacted in the past. So I will come up with some very random thought, but not necessarily a very systematic research topic. It's just my thinking recently, what we can do using behavioral economics concept and theory. For example, temporary discounting, which basically is one of the key main concepts in behavioral economics, which means, as a consumer, as a tourist, we prefer to maximize our utility or happiness through travel. But whether we react after COVID-19 to international travel immediately in the way as we did before, or we have to wait for a while to see what is going to happen, or most of the consumers probably will have wait and see behavior after COVID-19. Therefore, although this has not happened yet, but I'm sure later on we'll be able to see whether we will see a sudden surge of travelers to different destinations after COVID-19 is under control, or more or less under control, or at least the vaccination has been wide spread. So we'll see whether everyone will rush into travel to different places, or they will have to, or be a little bit hesitant and wait and see what is going to happen, and then before make decisions. I think this is something that we may look at in anticipation of COVID-19 situations under control. And also loss aversion. We have talked about this many times, especially in financial sector, financial research. We talk about loss aversion, loss love, and things like that. We know actually we love to win, but we also hate to lose even more, especially using this concept to look at the consumer behavior during COVID-19 or post-COVID-19, especially if we look at the demand for tourism during this period. Most of the influencing factors actually are not have any impact at all. So income, price, they do not actually matter at this moment, because mostly the destination shut down, businesses are closed, and then but once the COVID-19 started to be controlled, and then the consumer behavior will react to the factors that used to influence our decision will come to play, but the extent to which those factors will influence our decision will not be the same as as before, because we may actually play much more emphasize on risk, on travel risk in the future than in the past, because in the past the risk factor is one of the factors, but it's play a very a marginal role in many of the studies, but now actually they may play a much more higher role in our decision. If we are using, for example, error correction type model to look at the demand for tourism in the future, the error correction term, the coefficient, the value probably will be different from the coefficient if we're using normal data without considering COVID-19. Right? So we'll see. We don't know yet, but we'll see whether there's any asymmetric changes in terms of consumers' reaction to future travel, to the future demand, especially with the reaction to the risk posed when we travel, right? Another area that we can look at is we call it anchoring and framing. Basically, anchoring refers to the fact that our behavior relies heavily on the initial information we receive. Therefore, timely, accurate, authoritative information on the pandemic will affect tourists' intention to travel, especially where and when to travel. Because in the past, we know the information relatively play a relative constant role in terms of our decision. But now, given the pandemic, and there's a lot of information which are very important to influence our future travel. Therefore, the destinations need to present timely, accurate, and authoritative information with a view to attract tourists to the destination. So don't allow the fake information spread. So you need to have timely, accurate, authoritative information in your study, right? So this actually will become a very important factor that will influence our travel from economics perspective. So that's something we can look at. I will use some examples to illustrate later. And also framing, because in the pandemic, the business has suffered considerably. Therefore, many government or charitable organizations trying to develop some sort of policies or measures to counter the negative impact of pandemic on tourism or on the economy in general, and therefore a lot of policies has been proposed. But when the government and the charitable organizations present a policy trying to get the support of the public, then you have to using a certain language to frame your policy with a view to maximize the influence of the policy or get people to buy in the policy or to contribute financially to the policy. So this some area that we can look at. And also mental accounting is another area that we can look at. Remember, we're talking about the consumers are irrational or emotional in the sense that they actually, although it's the same financial term, but people actually will classify the money subjectively, which may lead to irrational expenditure, consumption. For example, if you want people to donate to a charitable organization to help people fight against the pandemic, whether you will attract people to donate from their regular income or windfalls. And this is a very interesting research topic to do. Remember, now many governments actually dished out many stimulus packages and especially cash packages to consumers in the United States. How many trillions of stimulus packages has been distributed to consumers, right? And this actually they distribute not only to the people who are affected, but also to the people who have not been affected. They're rich, they still have money, but still they get money, right? So then, if public if the government wants to develop some policies to attract some of these donations with a view to fight pandemic, then you should attract those people who receive this money as a windfall. But it will not be able to attract the donations from regular people who earn their regular income. So this is something will be very interesting. And social norm. And this is a concept especially relevant during the pandemic. Remember, fighting against COVID-19, you can see there's a clear divide between East and West, right? So you see in Asia, many of the countries, although let's not talk about the political system, right? Let's talk about the culture. So doesn't matter what type of political system the country are, but because the social norm and the culture in the Asia are completely different from the social norm and the culture in the West. And therefore, the way they fight against COVID-19 are different. And the result are also different, right? So if you look at Asia, when the pandemic first started, actually the government advised people to wear masks and everybody does it. I'm in Hong Kong, I know, right? So when the government said, okay, everyone should wear a mask, then everybody wear a mask. And this actually, if you don't wear a mask, you will be seen as an odd one, right? And people will say, all right, these guys must have some problem. But what happened in the West is, at the beginning, I remember, I have many friends in the UK and in other places. And if you wear a mask, you walk around on the street and you are the one as a strange person. So people probably will look down upon you. Well, this actually is a different social norm. And therefore, because the social norm are different, and then the behavior of citizens in these different societies are also different. And therefore, their fight against COVID-19, the approaches also are different, the result are different as well. So this actually is influenced not only by what type of system we are in. For example, if we talk about Hong Kong, so we are quite free, but everybody wear mask, same as China, same as Korea, same as people from Taiwan, and so on and so forth, right? So that's why we need to look at those different social norms, how they influence our fight against COVID-19, and how in the future will affect our travel behavior. I'm sure we will behave differently when we travel in the future, especially after COVID-19. So these are some of the things we may consider to look at. I quickly use an example, which is a research we have recently done, incorporate some of the concept I just explained to show how this can be utilized in our research. The example is we look at how to design effective public policies to mitigate the social costs of tourism during COVID-19. So this is a study. And the background of the study is that, do I have enough time? So probably maybe 5 minutes. So tourism may reduce, may actually induce a social cost at destination. We know when tourists move around, especially tourism from other countries to the destination, they will amplify the spread of diseases, right? So that's why at this period of time, tourism is more seen as a cost to the society instead of the benefit, right? Because they can spread the diseases. So the destinations will tend to introduce different policies to reduce the social cost of tourism under the pandemic, but at the same time, do not discourage tourism, right? Because many of the destinations relies on tourism very much, but then you have to balance this activity to minimize the social cost, but at the same time, maximize the benefit. So therefore, we're actually trying to see how the government can design useful, effective policies to deal with these potential social costs. And so therefore, our research objective is to examine how to design effective policy and explore the effect of information framing on residents' attitude to accept your policy to reduce the social costs. And also examine the influence of framing and mental accounting, which I explained earlier, to see how they influence the residents, local residents' willingness to pay for social cost reduction during the pandemic. Because if you lock down the destination, there will be fewer tourists, and the local economy will suffer, and the residents will suffer. But probably they will give up the benefit from the tourism with a view to contain the pandemic, and then they have to pay a price. So this is the price, how much they're willing to pay to actually contain the social reduce the social cost. And this actually is the study. Actually, it's 3 studies in this particular research. The first one basically is a qualitative study, look at the published studies to see what kind of policies has been introduced during the pandemic period. And the second study is to look at how the framing will influence residents' attitude towards the policies, the government policies. And the third study is to examine their willingness to pay to reduce the social cost given the government policy formulated. Because of the time, I'm not going to explain the methodology. It is basically standard research methodology. We are using questionnaire survey, and we're using econometric models to look at the influence of the COVID-19 and the policy, public policy response to the public policy introduction. Basically, we found the result is we found the framing induces respondent positive bias in favor of proposed policy measures, and that's understandable. By positive framing, actually we framing the same thing, but using more positive language than negative language, and that actually have a significant impact, which will actually this provide important reference for policymakers. You know, how you frame the policy and to benefit, you know, to maximize the benefit of the policy. Another interesting finding is that we found the employees in tourism-related industries and also cities with more confirmed cases, and they perceive the policy less effective, no matter what type of language you use, because they are heavily submerged in the situation. So whether using positive or negative, they understand the situation themselves. So it is not very effective. But for the less affected destinations, it has some impact. And another result is residents are willing to pay more to reduce the social cost of tourism through donations. And this actually is influenced by mental accounting, especially the residents are willing to donate more if they receive, you know, these windfalls, not regular income, but stimulus packages, they will donate more. So which means in the United States, for example, if the government want to attract some donations, or the charitable organizations, if they want to attract donations, they should actually target this group of people. They receive, you know, mass windfall. Especially recently, the stock market has been doing very well. You know, many people actually become very rich during the pandemic period. So, you know, they are the ones probably the government should target in terms of donation to fight COVID-19. I think this is what I have to say. The conclusion I don't need to repeat, but if you want to look at the details of this study, actually this paper has just been published in Journal Travel Research. And so you can have a look the paper in terms of methodology and also the key research findings, right? So that's my presentation.